Howdy doody, buckaroonies. In case you haven't figured it out by now, today we're going to be talking about this, which is the Novation Peak. I've been meaning to do a video about the Peak for a while now, and full disclosure, I kind of forgot, and then I didn't want to do it because I was lazy and didn't really want to edit some hour-and-a-half video of me ranting about the Peak. Today, we're going to be talking about 10 things I love about the Novation Peak. It's not a review. It's not some super feature deep dive. I just think all those videos have been done to death. So I just wanted to make a video about why I like this thing. To very briefly sum up my feelings about the Peak, I think it's one of my favorite synthesizers I've ever played, and it's one of my favorite synthesizers I've ever owned. As a musician, and as a sound designer, and as just kind of a synth enthusiast, I think all around the Novation Peak is a hell of a choice for a synthesizer. It's very, very powerful, and ultimately, to me, the most important thing is that it's very flexible. It does a lot of things I just need a synthesizer to do, and it sounds good doing them. Very quickly as well, some of the cons and downsides of the Peak. It does not support MPE, at least at the moment. I do really hope in the future there's some kind of MPE update. There's no high-pass filter. There is a high-pass filter here, but I would have liked a second high-pass filter somewhere in here because the low end of this can get a little bit annoying, so the lack of dual filters kind of sucks. There's no sequencer, which is not the end of the world if you have some kind of sequencer or whatever. I don't really need one. I just know some people really prefer sequencers in their synths. This does not have that. You only get 10 user wavetables at the moment, which is, maybe would have liked to have been able to overwrite some of the other ones just because I don't use them all that much. It does have really good wavetables, though, in the stock library. It just would have been nice to have an option to just get rid of them and then, bring them back in later if you wanted them. Outside of that, I would have liked to see a digital distortion of some kind with some extra modes, like a wave folding thing or something just a little fancier to get some extra timbres out of the synth. And then finally, the wavetable editor provided by Novation is pretty blah. It's not terrible. It's not really anything exciting or new. But with that said, it's not the end of the world. You could easily create some wavetables in Serum or Phase Plant or whatever you prefer to work in, bounce them out, and then port them into the Peak. So that's not really a con, just maybe a thing to be aware of. With all that in mind, I'm very comfortable in saying that if you are looking for a hardware synthesizer and you need something that's flexible, powerful, and sounds great while not really breaking the bank and will also hold its value, I think I'm comfortable in saying that. I think the Peak is a damn good investment. It is built like a tank. It feels great. It sounds excellent. And I think, the Peak and the Summit, honestly, in the future are going to be some nice synths to have around. I don't see this thing getting dated or whatever. It's designed with a lot of powerful features, but it's made like a classic synth that will never get old or boring or really feel super outdated. It has enough features to keep you interested and a good enough sound to make you want to keep it around. So I've poured myself a glass of Tullamore Dew here with a single ice cube, and I recommend you do as well. So sit down, snuggle in, take your pants off, grab a drink, and let's talk about the Novation Peak. One of the big things that drew me to the Peak is the filter, which is an actual analog filter combined with the digital oscillators and precision and stuff. It sounds really good. It's a very screechy, super resonant filter, but also has a really nice tone. It's great for classic sounds, but when you really push it to the extremes, it's a lot of fun. The filter offers 3 different modes: low pass, band pass, and high pass at 12 and 24 decibels per octave. There's oscillator 3 filter FM right here, and then we've got a distortion and everything else you need. I'm sure you know all this by now, but let's take a listen to some of the screechier sides of the filter. Right now, I've just got it zeroed out with kind of a screechy patch, but once we bring in some effects here, I think you'll really start to hear the magic of this thing. And let's try that with some effects. The filter is a lot of fun and just sounds great. Like I said, though, I really, really wish there was an extra digital high-pass filter because the low end of this is really, really nice. The Peak is one of the few synths, I think, that really gets that low-end meat and potatoes right. However, it does get pretty excessive at times. So I want to use a low pass, but I would also like a high pass in there somewhere just to cut out some of the garbage. I can obviously do that later, but I would really just prefer some kind of digital cut the bottom out filter that I could use to just get patches ready to go inside the Peak. Another thing that really drew me to the Peak is actually the internal effects. It's got 2 different distortions, a chorus with 3 different modes, a really decent delay, and a very, very nice reverb. I'm just gonna turn this to a sine wave here. Let's crank some reverb and get a nice sine pluck patch going just to hear the reverb as it is. We'll just go 100% wet. We'll go through each of these algorithms. For the sake of listening, this is the dry sine. Now let's bring in reverb number 1. Reverb number 2. And reverb number 3. Now, granted, that's not the most exciting example, but I think it's important to demonstrate. Now, let's try those sine waves again with a reverb here. This is algorithm 3. The level's probably about 90%, and the time is just below noon. Now, if we really wash this out, things get a lot more fun. The delay on the Peak is pretty solid as well. It's just kind of a digital delay. Not really anything exciting on its own, but within the effects menu, there's actually some options to go in and tweak the delay with a low pass and high pass damping. There's a synchronization mode. There's also a slew rate and width, so you can also use the left and right ratio and stuff to create stereo ping-ponging delays like this. This is a lot of fun, and we can also go in and start messing with the time. If we really crank the feedback, this can get really fun. And as we introduce some reverb as well, you can have a lot of fun experimenting with that to create some cool glitchy, stuttery effects. Finally, let's talk about that chorus. Let's bring in some kind of low pass saw. Make a basic pad sound here. Let's drop that reverb and delay just a bit. And bring in this lovely, lovely ensemble chorus. At a fast rate, you can create some kind of spooky sci-fi things, but at a slow rate, you can add some excellent dimension to your sounds. Let's add in a layer to this with another oscillator. Tune that bad boy up a bit. And of course, finish it off with the octave below. Without this chorus, not all that exciting, but once we start to bring it in, let's add a little bit of a filter envelope too. I'm feeling adventurous. Once we start to bring this in, slow it way down. I'm maybe at the first little dot on this here. Now, on a similar note, one of my other favorite things about this is the ability to simulate some kind of analog drift and stuff. By going into the oscillators here, we can go into the oscillator common tab and start adding some divergence and drift. And this can get real spicy. Let's drop the drift to something relatively low. We'll bring in both oscillators here. And mind you, these are not detuned in any way. This is just the straight up oscillators with this drifting and divergence setup. If we increase this, in combination with a nice subtle chorus, we can really get some classic synth patches going on very quickly. One of the other equally powerful features of this to emulate cool analog-y stuff is to go into the mod matrix, and there is a little trick to get things to sound a bit more interesting. If we go into our mod matrix and let's assign LFO1 bipolar to oscillator 1, 2, and 3's pitch, then we go into the LFO, we can go to LFO1 and add slew. We'll crank the slew all the way up and set this to sample and hold mode, and then we'll just slow the rate quite a bit. Back into our mod matrix, add some depth to this, and we're going to get some really nice, subtle, slow, gooey analog drift to the entire patch. One of the other things I really enjoy about the Peak is its ability to be a pretty convincing FM synth. Now, this is not a DX7 and this is not a Digitone. I had a Digitone and I ended up selling it because when it really comes down to it, the Peak does pretty much everything I need in terms of FM. The Digitone had a cool sequencer, which the Peak does not, and obviously the Peak is not multi-timbral, whereas the Digitone is. But with all that out of the way, the Peak is fully capable of some really cool FM sounds because it actually offers a pretty decent FM thing. And because we have a lot of different waveforms and we can have custom wavetables, it honestly, in my opinion, probably makes it a bit more powerful than the Digitone for the mileage you can get out of the FM. Now, there are only 3 oscillators, but honestly, in the Digitone, I don't know that I ever really did patches where I was like, oh, wow, I sure am glad I have this 4th operator. You know, the Peak is fully capable of some pretty cool FM tones. Accessing FM on the Peak is pretty simple. We just go into the mod matrix, we'll go to our destination, and we'll find one of our oscillators here. So we've got FM1 into 2, FM2 into 3, FM3 into 1, and then FM noise to 1. Then we can also do oscillator 3 to the filter frequency and noise to the filter frequency. So with that in mind, you can really do a lot of your classic FM patches. If we do 2 into 1 here, we'll just make these both sine waves. We'll bring up oscillator 2. Then we'll go in here and start bringing in oscillator 1 for the FM. Bring that up an octave. And we can also control this with an envelope. So let's assign mod envelope 2 to this. We'll go into mod envelope 2, add a quick envelope here. With some adjustments here, we could turn this into a nice growly bass line. Add some filter movement here. Some resonance. Get some of that distortion. A little bit of reverb. And there we go, a basic FM thing. We could also easily turn this into some nice keys and stuff by doing something like that. I guess kind of a super distorted wooden sound. We can maybe tame this a bit and go for something a bit more sensible, like so. And because we can change these waveforms, we get access to a lot of cool sounds as well as the wavetables, so we could bring these in. And manually move the wavetable or control it with something else. With all that in mind, the Peak is pretty functional as an FM synth as well, so it's a lot of bang for your buck in terms of the features. We get kind of a analog, classic polysynth type of feel from it. We get the cool digital wavetable-y stuff, and we also get some pretty solid FM all around. It's not a proper FM synth, but it really does the job for probably 80% of the FM sounds I actually need in a day-to-day situation. For anything more complex, obviously there are VSTs that are way easier to just do that on rather than buying a dedicated hardware synth, because FM is pretty digital, and I don't know that there's anything besides maybe the DX7 that offers FM that has a specific sound to it that can't really just be recreated entirely in software. And even with the DX7, we've got the DX7V from Arturia, and honestly, sounds identical to me. One of the other great things about the Peak is they actually added in some extra LFOs, which is awesome. These are accessible by going into the LFO menu, and if you go through, you can actually access 3 and 4. So we get 4 LFOs we can assign to just about anything, which is really, really nice. That's really all there is to say about that, but it is a really good feature to know about because we actually do get 4 LFOs and not just these 2. So that's pretty powerful, and it opens up just a lot more movement and modulation, which is always a plus in my book. Speaking of movement and modulation, the mod matrix on the Peak is damn good. This is really cool because it's one of the few synths I think that gets the mod matrix right. Now, I'm not a software developer or electronics engineer or anything like that, but I think as a synth person, it's fair for me to say that mod matrices are tricky to get right, I think, but the Peak really pulls it off well. A lot of mod matrices want to open up as many features as possible, which is awesome. However, that becomes extremely tedious to dive through, and there's all sorts of fiddling and twiddling and whatever, and that is kind of annoying. The Peak, though, really does this right. We get 16 slots, and everything for that slot is just on a single page, making it really easy to just pop open the mod matrix, find a slot, assign your stuff, and move on with your life. So I really appreciate that. On a similar note, one of the other really cool things about the Peak is that the effects actually have their own mod matrix. It's not as big, it's only 4 slots, but we can tie different things to a couple of the important effect parameters, I guess. And this is really powerful and really, really fun. And I like that it's separate from the regular mod matrix because that's opened up for doing stuff, and then the effects kind of get treated with their own special mod matrix, which is just really nice. Moving right along, one of the other great things is user wavetables. We can add custom wavetables to this thing, which is really, really awesome, and I'm very glad that this was finally added. The factory wavetables are more than enough. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. However, some of them, at least in my opinion and in my experience, are geared towards certain sounds, I guess, that maybe not everyone finds useful, myself included. So we get 10 user wavetables that we can add and really easily import, export, whatever, which is awesome. As I mentioned earlier, I would have liked a way to just get rid of the factory wavetables or have an option to take out them because I just don't use some of them. I just flat out have never used those wavetables, and I wish I could just dump them and replace them with my own. Wavetable editing on this is super easy, and it's through the Novation Components web interface, which is pretty cool, and you can actually do this in real time. I've got components up here, and this is the wavetable editor. So we get 5 frames per wavetable. There's a harmonics editor, there's a grid setting, which is nice, and there's also some tools, including freehand drawing, line drawing, and then a couple waveforms. We also get some smoothing stuff here, so we can set this to 0% smoothing to really draw something super kooky and wacky, and the harmonics are updated instantly as well. We can also access the phase, which is pretty cool. And then if I actually go through here, we'll see that we have sines on frames 2 through 5, and this first one is this really goofy thing. With that being said, I can now hear the sine waves here as I go up, and if we go down towards frame 2 and 1, there's our super kooky thing. The smoothing settings are really nice if you want to draw something smooth that's not super crazy. It'll just kind of interpolate the jagged edges of your drawing into something a bit more usable, which is really nice. There's a bunch of wavetables available from Noisia, which is pretty cool. And if we want to actually load in a wavetable, you can do that as well. It's also really easy to import wavetables from elsewhere. If we go up to import, third-party wavetable, let's grab our Icon Has Kick from Serum, and away we go. We have this as a wavetable in the Peak now. And now here we have it, the Icon Has Kick. For getting all those disgusting snails fart basses right from your Novation Peak, which is pretty fun. The next thing I love about the Peak is the fact that it does polyphonic aftertouch, and it doesn't exactly make this clear at first. In order to do that, you just go into the mod matrix and assign aftertouch. There is no different thing between aftertouch and poly aftertouch. They are just the same setting. If you have aftertouch enabled, that means it's also capable of receiving polyphonic aftertouch if you have a controller capable of transmitting that. In my case, my Arturia Keylab Mark II does not. Only the drum pads do, which is stupid. There are not a lot of hardware MIDI controllers for some reason that offer poly aftertouch, but the Sensal Morph does. So now that I have that, I can actually finally take advantage of this, and you can assign this to quite a few different destinations, which is really, really cool and really, really powerful. And it's a lot of fun, especially for things like the FM patches. So this is just a super basic patch utilizing poly aftertouch for the filter frequency. And this is what that sounds like and means, I guess. Now, that's a lot of fun, and like I said, very powerful, especially when it comes to things like FM and whatever. I do really want MPE for this thing, though. The poly aftertouch is a good taste of it, but I think the Peak would really unlock a lot of its potential with MPE supported, and I, again, really hope we see that in the relatively near future as a firmware update. Finally, the last thing I love about the Novation Peak, and in my opinion, one of the more important aspects, is that damn, this thing looks good. It is a sexy little box of wonders, and I think it's built really well. It feels great, but it just looks nice. And maybe this is just a me thing. I don't know. I think the look of hardware is important, and it's important to have things around you that inspire you. And I think that goes beyond gear and stuff, but the Peak just looks really cool, and it looks accessible. You know, it's got a lot of knobs and blinking lights, so it's really like, wow, look at all this stuff, and look at all this blinking stuff, and you know, these knobs are shiny, and you know, whatever, but it's a damn good looking synth. The wood end caps as well are really nice, and I think it's held up really well over time. I have no complaints about the build quality, and I think it just looks excellent. So it's a cool thing to have around, and it's something that ultimately I look forward to using. I come in my studio, I see this thing and say, let's twiddle that box of stuff right there. And I think that concludes everything for this video. So hey, cheers for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the Novation Peak and stuff. I highly recommend this synth. I think it's really good, bit pricey, but I think well worth it. And again, something I think that will hold its value well into the future. And that wraps everything up for this video. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.